This is part 2 of the lecture on Chapter 11, the Self, Identity, and Personality. As discussed earlier, if you need to improve your self-esteem, you have to remember to take responsibility of your own self-esteem. You need to create those action plans to achieve those goals that you set forth. And also remember to use the coping strategies that you developed over your years. Now, for many, it's not just the attainment of goals, but the attainment of meaningful goals that makes life satisfying. So younger adults are more likely to assess their well-being in terms of accomplishments and careers. As you get older, it changes. Older adults are more likely to link well-being with good health and the ability to accept change. Emotional-related goals become increasingly important. What is identity? Now go back to that assignment that I asked you to do, where I asked the question of, who am I? Those 20 items, and hopefully you were able to name 20, actually define what your identity is. You will find that many of you responded to the question of who am I by mentioning what your career is, or what your work path will be, what your political beliefs are, your spiritual beliefs, whether or not you are in a relationship or not, what your cultural or ethnic background is, what your interests are, your personality, how you would describe yourself, introvert, extrovert. All of those terms define what your identity is. Now, Erikson has a view on identity as well, and this is stage 5 out of his 8 stages, identity versus identity confusion. Adolescents are faced with deciding who they are, what they're all about, and where they're going in life. Questions occur throughout life, but become especially important during adolescence. I do believe that I have defined what crisis is and commitment. So once again, crisis is defined as a period of identity development during which the individual explores alternatives. Commitment is a personal investment in identity. The 4 statuses that we talked about were identity diffusion, identity foreclosure, identity moratorium, and identity achievement. You can find examples of all of this on page 362 of your text. Identity diffusion is the status of individuals who have not yet experienced a crisis or made any commitments. Identity foreclosure is the status of individuals who have made a commitment but have not experienced a crisis. Identity moratorium is the status of individuals who are in the midst of a crisis but whose commitments are either absent or only vaguely defined. And finally, identity achievement is the status of individuals who have undergone a crisis and have made that commitment. Now keep in mind, identity may not remain stable throughout the rest of your life. Things change from moratorium and achievement and then back again. Identity consolidation continues into early adulthood and possibly into part of middle adulthood. So basically, individuals move from early to middle adulthood and become more concerned about their identity. And this moves us into the next part of our chapter on personality. There's several different views of adult personality development. Levinson's season of a man's life is one of them. Developmental tasks mastered at each age. 70 to 80% of men studied found that midlife transition tumultuous and psychologically painful. Levison maintains that females also undergo midlife crises. Views of midlife as a crisis. I guess people have the fear of getting older. They don't want to move into the next lifespan, so the anxiety and the angst suddenly appear. So middle-aged adult is suspended between the past and the future and trying to cope with the gap to ensure life's continuity. George Valent also has some studies. His were longitudinal studies of adult development. his predictors of happy well at the age of 75 to 80. He felt that regular exercise, avoiding being overweight, well-educated, stable marriage, future-oriented, thankful and forgiving, empathizing with others, and having good coping skills really brought you to that happy well stage. Alcohol abuse and smoking were the best predictors of death at 75 to 80. Midlife crisis, he didn't feel as if there was such a thing as a midlife crisis. The 40s are instead a decade of reassessing and recording the truth about the adolescent and the adult years. So basically, his definition of midlife crisis would just be that time period in your 40s where you really start to reassess who you are, what your wants are, what your needs are, and where you are next headed in life. Personality. Middle-aged adults interpret, shape, alter, and give meaning to their lives. Midlife crisis may be experienced in one extent of your life, but not the others. So you may have a midlife crisis when it comes to work versus family. In 1/3 of the cases of midlife crises, it's triggered by life events such as a job loss, financial problem, or illness. And this takes us to Erikson's 7th stage. In this stage, middle-aged adults are especially concerned about generativity. It's linked to positive social engagements in family life and community activities. It's associated with better latter life health and adjustment to aging. So many ways to fulfill the needs for generativity versus the stagnation is biological. Adults conceive and give birth to children. Parental. Adults provide nutrients and guidance to children. Work. Adults develop skills that are passed down to others. And cultural. Adults create, renovate, or conserve some aspect of their culture. Life events can influence an individual's development depending on what the event is, as well as mediating factors, the individual's adaptation to the event, life stage context, and socio-historical context. Now, some of the drawbacks to the contemporary life event approach is that there's too much emphasis placed on change and not enough on stability. Daily experience may be primary source of stress, but not major life events. So if you notice, here is a diagram here that shows life stage context and socio-historical context. And meeting in the middle, you may have a life event, marriage, widowhood, new job, birth of a child. You have mediating variables, which would be your physical health, intelligence, personality, family support, income. The two combine, and you need to actually learn how to adapt. So there's either the appraisal of threat, which would be between your life event and your mediating variables meshing, and using your coping strategies. So that is all part of your adaptation process, which then would lead to your development change. And this is the part, the coping strategies is the part that you really need to focus on in order to be healthy. There are some trait theories that state that personality consists of broad dispositions called traits that tend to produce characteristic responses. In other words, people can be described in terms of the basic ways that they behave, such as whether they are outgoing and friendly or whether they are dominant and assertive. Although trait theorists disagree about which traits make up personality, they do agree that traits are the foundation of personality. So here on this screen, I have the big 5 factors of personality. And that's the view that personality is made up of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeability or agreeableness, and neuroticism. related to health, intelligence, cognitive functioning, achievement, work, and relationships. So if you turn to page 366 and 367 in your textbook, it really goes into detail as to what each of these 5 factors of personality is. And looking at my picture here, the big 5 personality traits are all tied together. Open, extroverted, conscientious, stable, agreeable. This concludes my lecture on Chapter 11, the Self, Identity, and Personality. Just take a moment and reflect on your own personal journey in life. Think about the big 5 factors of personality for a few moments, and using those big 5 factors, describe your own personality.